Okay, welcome to our workplace innovation series. My name is Andrew Farah. I'm your host, and I'm a co-founder and CEO of a company called Density. I am always thrilled to have Peter Van Emburgh on a phone call, and particularly in a format like this, because we get the chance to actually talk to someone who's making material decisions about how people use space, and at the present moment, how a rather large portfolio is managing the safe return and reopening of offices, the management of those spaces, and in particular, what's working and what's not working. Peter, I think if you want to say a quick hi and your background really briefly, we'll jump in.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. And it's a pleasure being back. At this time, last time you had me on, it was very early in the pandemic. So it was like a year ago. And it was a lot of just thinking about, we got to get rushed. We got to get all this PPE. We got to get these offices ready because in a couple of weeks, people will be batting down the doors, begging to come back into the office. And here we are a year later, and we are slowly coming back into our offices and things are starting to come back to normal. But any event, so I lead global corporate real estate for Cbre. So I have purview of the site selection, the design, the transacting, the build out, and the strategy associated with our 500 offices around the world. So yeah, happy to be here, Andrew.
So I would love to start with what did you think was going to happen when we talked a year ago, and what was different?
Well, as I alluded to, I thought this would be, I wouldn't say relatively short term, but I just remember we were in a rush and leaning so heavily on our supply chain and our supply chain relationships. So Cbre is a company we're fortunate to work with so many excellent, big, fun companies around the world, and we manage billions of square feet around the world. So we've got some pretty strong supplier relationships, and we were just leaning on these to find hand sanitizer, find all sorts of things. And some of the things that we thought would be really big deal to our professionals would be indoor air quality. That hasn't changed. We saw a lot, really big focus on safety and employee safety, which is a great thing. And I think there's been a big renewed focus on the health of the buildings that we occupy, access to functional outdoor spaces that actually work. And I think what we're also has been kind of a pleasant surprise out of all this has really been the acceleration of some of the workplace technology, which I know we'll get into in this call.
Yeah. So for the folks who are listening in, and there's quite a number, if you have questions for Peter or for the discussion, please just toss them into the Q&A. I'm going to manage my mute button so that most of what you're hearing is Peter and not me. But just toss them in the Q&A and I'll work them into the discussion just like last time. So I guess let's talk about safety real quick. So what is safety at Cbre? Like, how do you think about safety? How do you think about reopening or managing? I guess, are you open? Do you have open offices?
So yes, we are. The majority of our offices are open, especially in APAC. It's different region by region, but I'd say probably 90% of our offices are open today. Now, we believe we have like a safety culture at Cbre in general that's just really embedded into the culture of who we are. And so there was just it made business sense to make sure that as we reopened our offices, and we started to really reopen them this past summer, but it was very deliberate, it was very slow, it was very strategic and methodical. We looked at, every office had to submit an application to reopen. I sent out a survey to every single landlord that we work with to really get an understanding of what adjustments they were making to the core and shell. What sort of visitor protocol do they have in place? Do they have availability of PPE? That was on the landlord side. We also had to procure a lot of the safety materials as well. We had to prepare our offices to be reopened. And that involved really setting safe capacity limits. So when an office was approved to be reopened, and I sit on the committee that helps make those decisions, we typically set them at 40% safe occupancy limit. And that's 40% of the total seat capacity on a floor or for the whole building. And that was in concert with a lot of our professionals in workplace strategy and Cbre design that helped us really inform what is that right limit. And so for us, it was about 40%. And that allowed for a lot of the right social distancing to take place for these offices. Certain jurisdictions, however, as part of the reopening process, we would look at what the local laws or local jurisdictions are mandating because it is not consistent at all. Certain jurisdictions would actually mandate it needs to be 15%, like we had in some cities and locales. So we set that out. Now, even after an office has been approved to reopen, we watched it every single week. And what I mean by we watched the community health factors, which is a big factor of allowing an office to open, allowing for an office to stay open. So we looked at ICU bed capacity and usage. We looked at the positivity rate. We looked at the cases per million. We wanted to see a downward trajectory of cases over a 7 or 14-day period. So this was the criteria that we really enforced and held ourselves true to. It's part of our playbook. And I'm proud to say that we have had 0 cases in any of our offices that we've reopened in the Americas. And
that's awesome.
So we're really proud of that. A lot of that credit is to our frontline operations workers.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've been working remote for, I think, longer than you probably maybe expected, or at least that the workforce at Cbre has been working remote for longer than maybe you'd hoped or wanted. Is it a full replacement for the office? Like, can we just give up the offices? As someone who is a professional in not only managing, corporate offices, but also, and a global portfolio, but also in the business of managing and sort of building out space for end clients, is the office gone? And are we working from home?
Absolutely not. We work with a lot of large occupiers of space, and the majority of our clients, nearly all of them, are not giving up the office. We'll hear about different cases. There's a couple companies I know that are out there in the news by saying either we're giving up all our office space or part of it, but that's not us. I think, if anything, this pandemic has really helped reinforce and prove the importance of place and the importance of the office. Now, does it serve perhaps a different perspective or a different use and will evolve? Absolutely. And that's kind of the fun of it all. So we're seeing it truly reinforcing culture, community, collaboration. We're seeing it really be a place where people can come together and meet with people. We're seeing it as a destination to bring clients, and it amplifies the brand of who we are. We've done a lot of research of our clients, with our clients. We've done a lot of research on ourselves and what does it mean for Cbre. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, of course, real estate is our core business. So, of course, we're going to have a point of view and a bias, but we're thinking very, very strategically about what is the purpose of space, how does our space need to be reconfigured, and really what is the future of work and how work gets done at Cbre, just like our clients are asking a lot of our professionals for. We're doing it for ourselves, and we're learning a lot along the way.
So you said something really interesting in one of our prep calls, which was like, we are competing, the quote was, we are competing with the convenience of working at home. What did you mean by that?
What I mean by that is, a lot of people have gotten really used to it, and the pleasure of being able to roll out of bed, do your workout, have coffee with your wife or your partner, and see your kids, and have a 2-minute commute to the home office. That's pretty nice. And so as someone who manages our portfolio and manages our space, I have to recognize that the office and the workplace competes against that convenience of working from home. So what is it about the office that serves a purpose outside of really mandating that people have to come to work? I don't see us ever doing that.
Yeah.
What is it that will actually draw them in and magnetize the workforce back to the office? And we see things like, again, the technology for work and at work, huge drivers of bringing people back into the office. We see overwhelmingly the need and the desire to collaborate and be with their peers and their teams people really miss that that kind of peer interaction that's not scheduled and it's more serendipitous and informal. I think there's, again, just a huge attraction of, fueling the business, serving a need, serving our clients at a place of work.
So what's your bet? I've heard like August, end of August as our sort of the school year rolls around. I've heard, no, we're betting on January 1. Like what's your, I mean, you're open, you have offices that are open. So like, what does it mean to be like back? Is that a certain percentage use? Is that vaccines are more broadly available? Sort of curious, like how you're thinking about what back means.
I mean, I think back is fully back, dependent on the vaccine. And I think, again, speaking as a parent who's still dealing with virtual learning and kids who are at home doing school full time with 2 working parents, I think that is a huge factor. We are recognized, our professionals, a lot of people that we see and work with have to balance those competing priorities of caretaking. And so until that's addressed, until kids are back in school, until we have a vaccine, there won't be a real fully back. But of course, what we're trying to figure out and solve for instead is what does the new normal look like, which I hate that term, but what does that plateau look like? Is it 100% of the pre-pandemic levels being at work, doing work in a major city center, or is it something less? We really see the continued emergence of the hybrid workforce, the continued desire to incorporate flexible space into what is the place of work. So I think it's really going to be a portfolio or an ecosystem of different workplaces that constitute destination of work. Will it be the same level pre-pandemic? I don't think so. Will it be pretty close or closer than people think? I do.
So, in a number of conversations we've had with other folks, one of the things that we've heard a lot about is sort of an acceleration of trends that preceded the pandemic. So things like shared space or moving to unassigned. You have some actual data on sort of how that change has been received by some of the folks that you work with. Curious if you can kind of talk to like, what have you learned? Is this a trend that we expect to stick around?
So you're right. There's a lot of trends that were already in place prior to the pandemic that have only been accelerated, this being one of them. So one of the things I looked at and hired an architecture partner of ours to look at was, we're 8 years into this journey, which at Cbre we call Workplace 360. It's nothing new. A lot of professional services firms had already been doing it around hoteling or hot desking. That was our standard. We started with our then headquarters in downtown LA, and we kicked everyone out of their assigned offices. We shrunk the footprint, over-invested in technology and hospitality, and said, no one has assigned seating. You don't have an assigned office. You don't have your name anywhere, but we are very thoughtfully and diligently programming to make sure there are so many choices of where work gets done within 4 walls, both in a hot desking or workplace environment or unenclosed, as well as enclosed environments, offices, focus rooms, team rooms, huddle rooms, conference rooms. So there was just a tremendous variety of where work gets done, but didn't have someone's office with their name on it sitting empty 40% or 70 or 80 or 60% of the time sitting empty. So the pandemic, I hired this firm to say, is this still the right strategy post-pandemic? And all the research and findings showed that yes, double down on that. That's the right way to go. And so we're looking at different ways to adjust our future workplace standard. We're going to see probably more collaborative spaces, more technology, a huge focus on well-being and indoor air quality, of course, but we're sticking with unassigned.
Yeah. So there's a good question just sort of about, as an extension of this, is it unassigned sort of first come, first serve, or is it unassigned where you're actually like booking desks, spaces, or neighborhoods?
Good question. And this is one we're still actually doing a little more digging and diving into, but you can reserve offices and conference rooms. We have first come, first serve for the workstation, but we create neighborhoods. neighborhood. So there's a sense of place and belonging where, Andrew wants to sit with his, software engineers for the day, and he will head to that neighborhood. But then there are other days where you're like, I don't want to see them. I want to actually get work done and not, be stuck talking with them and be full of distractions. So I'm just going to go pick up my laptop and sit somewhere else on the floor plate. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. There's another really good question about just sort of how you're dealing with this hybrid model. So how are you keeping track of how many employees are in a city that are using an office versus working at home?
So, and I assume you mean right now, meaning as our offices have reopened.
I think that's the heart of the question, but it does sort of speak to sort of like what does the future offices need? I imagine that if I were sort of interpreting this, it's like we've got a baseline of what's happening now as it relates to like the pandemic.
Yeah.
How is that informing our real estate strategy going forward? And we're starting to use data as a way to inform some of those decisions. So how are you kind of keeping track of the folks that are in a city and who are using it or not?
So what's interesting is, I spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on real estate, and one of my peers, we don't really measure it that well or to the extent that you would really think. So one of the things that we invested in really pre-pandemic, but it worked out, was, obviously we rolled out our density deployment across 2 million square feet. And it's first time we've been able to really measure and track the amount of people coming to our space and actually utilizing it against a set capacity of seats. Imagine that. So as our offices have opened, what we are tracking is two things. One is we have that safe capacity limit, say 40%. So if there's 100 seats in the office, we'll have 40 reservations available. And the operations staff has gone around assigning, okay, these desks are appropriately social distance. You can stuff them into certain enclosed offices, but there's 40 seats available that day. So we're tracking those reservations in the app, which was accelerated through the pandemic, our host app. So they can book a reservation and say, I'm going to the office that day. But at the same time, I'm also tracking on the back end the space data and utilization data real time. So what was interesting and fascinating through all of this were just a series of big questions that leaders had, such as, are people just showing up, grabbing a few things and heading out to lunch? Are people showing up right when their office open? They've been stuck at home for months. They can finally go to work, and then they're like, this is kind of annoying. I have to wear a mask sometimes. Like the people I want to see aren't here. Restaurants may be closed. Like, forget it, I'm not coming. Are people actually coming back and staying in the office? How long are they staying in the office? Those were key business questions that I was able to answer because I was finally able to have measurable data that could inform that. I was saying, no, actually their dwell time was this. They're showing up and they're staying. Or, this was the peak day. No surprise, middle of the week. Or, sure. And just like armed with those sort of data and insights was really, really helpful throughout this pandemic. Now, to your other point, how will this inform the long-term or future strategy? I don't know. I mean, it's anybody's guess. We're doing lots of research. We're talking to lots of people. We're meeting with clients. But until we have the real data to tell us and show us, at this point, we can only make some informed assumptions, be in a test mode, a pilot mode, be willing to experiment, and then we'll have the data that really drives some hardcore decisions and strategy.
Quick practical point. You talked about masks. You had a very interesting policy that you implemented, I think, based on local ordinances around mask usage and wearing inside of offices. What was the policy?
So, we do a lot of research on this. We have a health expert inform us, but for the majority of our offices in the U.S., we follow the masks in motion. I think that's what you're talking about. So if you're sitting at your socially distant workstation or an enclosed space, you can take the mask off. But the minute you get up to go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, touchless, or otherwise, you're wearing the mask. However, certain jurisdictions are extremely specific and stringent on that. Or if for some offices, we have reduced the safe capacity limit based on several key community factors.
Sure.
A couple weeks ago, months ago, Dallas and Texas spiked. There were no ICU beds available. It's just not very safe, and we don't want to put that strain on the community via our workforce. So we limited the capacity to 15% for the office, and that's kind of what we call tier 3 of 3 levels. And when you hit tier 3, though, it's universal masking. So you're wearing a mask all over the office at all times. It's not really pleasant, and but surprising that people were still showing up.
Yeah, it's interesting that you can essentially implement a policy and then measure whether or not people actually still show up and stay, as opposed to just showing up to pick stuff up. So just to clarify, because it looks like there's actually a number of questions about this. One question is, how are you tracking the number of people in the office? The other is, what technologies have become more important as you're thinking about social distancing and hygiene? Maybe just to clarify that you work with some of Density's stuff to count people in space.
Yeah.
Do you have sort of other technologies that you're looking at around hygiene or sort of other, maybe not policing, but sort of monitoring of distancing? Is there anything else that you've implemented?
We have not done any of the, like, there's some apps I've seen where they'll have like contact tracing on bracelets and stuff. Or if you get within a certain, like maybe it was like the sports teams were doing something like that.
Yeah, the NBA. Yeah.
Pretty badass. We haven't.
That's awesome. It's also nuts though. It's also nuts though, because when you get on the bus to go to a game, it's just it's just beeping like constantly. They did this in Disney World.
That's funny. Yeah, it wasn't maybe in our budget. No, so we didn't do that. We didn't invest in any sort of fancy UV filtration thing. There's some of those, technologies I've seen some landlords do where like you walk through some archway and you're just sanitized. Maybe it works. I don't know. But yeah, what we've done has worked for us so far.
There's a bunch of questions. So one of them sort of asks about the difference in generational differences, or kind of how age has maybe changed the expectation of what an office is supposed to be or for, and how that'll shape your or your clients' offices of the future post-COVID and beyond. Not everybody's a millennial. Like not everybody is.
Yeah. There's interesting insights there. I mean, again, but you could slice and dice it so many different ways. So we were seeing, a huge influx when we reopened New York City, our 200 Park office, huge influx of the young professionals there, probably because they were in like a 96 square foot apartment in New York and they were desperate to get out. I get it. Is that really generational, or is that lifestyle? I mean, who knows? That's also a New York thing. But I'd say what was interesting was, in terms of the demographics of who was really had a high demand of coming back to our offices that had reopened, were older generation and the younger generation. The middle generation, probably my whatever demographic I am, where we've got kids at home or kids schooling, those were the ones that were, I guess, not showing up as much.
Sure.
Really say it. But does that really inform future strategy? We're not putting a lot of weight into that.
Gotcha. Makes sense. I mean, these are some really good questions. So I'm just going to keep kind of going down the list. Okay. So to what extent does this hybrid model complicate the physical space? So
you mean hybrid workforce?
Well, yeah, hybrid workforce maybe is maybe a better, you've got people that are working maybe some portions of their week at home, some portions of their week in the office. It'll be different in the future. We just don't know to what degree it'll be different. So I think the question is a good one, which is like, how does it increase the complexity of the physical workplace? Or how does it make it more about hospitality? I mean, you've had some very interesting ideas around like the future of the office starts to look like sort of fill in the blank. And it feels a lot more like a hotel as far as I sort of understand than it does maybe kind of our traditional sense of an office. So yeah, I guess the simple question is, to what extent is the hybrid model or hybrid approach complicating physical workplace?
I mean, it's complicating, but it's also making it fun. And again, if we were...
How so?
Well, I mean, if we were a company that was just like, You're coming in 8 to 5. That doesn't make my job any fun. So the aspect of how you try to design this kind of, and I mentioned it earlier, but this ecosystem of portfolio. And it's not just home and office. People work in a coffee house. People will go do work in an airport lounge. Some people may be like, you know what, I've got a big territory in the greater LA. I'm not going to drive all the way to the valley. I don't know my LA terms, but I'm not going to drive all the way across the valley to an office.
Where do you live? Just to clarify, where do you live for the attendees? Not in LA, I think.
I'm like East Coast bias here. I'm just making it up here. But I'm not going to drive across, a large geographic span where it's just really inconvenient just to go to an office for 20 minutes when maybe as an employee perk, we're going to give our employees access to flex space. That maybe this is something we're exploring. So this week we just made a big splash, Cbre, $200 million into Industrious, and so this is just something we believe in the flex space. We believe in the growth of it. Our occupiers that we survey are large enterprise accounts, growing percentage saying they are going to really actively explore flex space into their portfolio. So how do you incorporate that? Yes, it's a little complicated, but it's fun. And so now, of course, for my own portfolio, I'm looking at where the nearest Industrious offices are against all my corporate offices. And we're still trying to figure out, like, would we be next to an Industrious or a flex space? Would we be above it? Would we be inside of a flex space provider? Or is it, you know what, Andrew, like, you also have access to a monthly pass in Industrious, and at the end of the day, you need to drop into the Century City Industrious instead of coming all the way back to downtown LA. Have at it.
Well, I think that this brings up a broader point of just like, what is the purpose of an office to begin with? Is it culture? Is it productivity? Is it sort of creating space for people to create sort of connection and generate creativity? Like, what is the purpose of an office? Because it's like, if I go to an Industrious or I go to a CBRE office, but I'm doing CBRE work, or I'm working from home, but I'm doing CBRE work from all three of those places, and effectively, does it really matter if I can figure out how to check the material boxes of culture building, creativity, and sort of spontaneous ideas, and so forth?
It goes back to, the fundamental principle of Workplace 360 for us 10 years ago was centered around employee choice, giving our employees choice on where they wanted to do work. And some of that work was an airport lounge or a coffee shop. Now you're throwing in flex space providers and all of that. However, what is the purpose of our office? I think what you're trying to say. And what we're continuing to find is there's technology at work that you just can't do from home. So one example is we invest in our large offices like San Francisco in your backyard and Salesforce Tower. We have a multi-screen immersive display inside a room, which we call Liquid Galaxy. Sounds like really high end, but it's like multiple big screens on a curved wall powered by Google Earth and content fed by our CBRE marketing and research and landlord and real estate market data. And you bring the clients there, and instead of spending however many days it takes to get around greater LA, let's stick with that analogy.
Nice.
And just sit in that room, and it's just like fly in, fly out, and you're doing building tours and site tours all from one room powered by Google Earth. It's really, really powerful. Now, you cannot replicate that at home. So that's just one example of a technology at work. You can't really do it from home. And that's you're using Liquid Galaxy all day long, every day of the week.
But I kind of want one for my living room.
I'm with you. So, and we're trying to think about what else. So, one thing that we're playing around with is this like 360-degree immersive pitch room, where you walk in, it's floor to ceiling, and it is just like that is your client pitch. And it is just invading all of your senses and probably making people feel really dizzy, like they're in a Disney World ride. However, that's another example that you draw people back in, and a lot of that is awesome technology, awesome places that foster collaboration, that foster culture, that foster innovation. I'm struggling personally. I had a brainstorm with a team this morning, and we're all different places, and we're on Zoom, you're using Miro board, and there's some cool technology stuff out there, but it's just not the same as sitting in a room, give me a whiteboard marker and go to town.
And you can't throw the whiteboard marker in the trash to make a point, with the whole team.
Right.
It's just, it feels like this, or miss it. Yeah. So one of the things that I've always sort of been curious about is like CBRE is in a unique position to essentially use its office as a mechanism to determine, okay, what are the things that we adopt ourselves? And then when we bring clients in, we sort of dog food a lot of our own decisions in order to demonstrate whether or not they're effective. So you'd said that you had dog fooded in this Workplace 360 concept. A pretty material portion of your real estate is unassigned seating. Is that correct?
Correct. What is portfolio?
What was that?
Over half the portfolio is in a Workplace 360. We have over 90 of them around the world.
And so like 50% of your portfolio is unassigned, and then maybe you already mentioned this in a previous answer, but what is the feedback? What's the percentage feedback when you ask your employees?
I didn't answer that, but you did ask me earlier. So we do post-occupancy surveys like everyone else does. Shockingly, across 90 offices, 93% of our people said they would not go back to the old model, where they had their corner office with their pictures of cats and their trophies of the biggest deal award. 93% would not go to the old way. That's insane.
Yeah, I would say that's a trend. I mean, that's a great sort of long-standing. Do you think it goes back the other direction? 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, 93% of people are like, I want assigned space. Like, what do you
Maybe.
think?
I don't know. We'll find out. We also looked at the business revenue output tied to whether or not they were sitting in a 360 office or a non-360 office. Mm-hmm. Research proved that our brokers made more money when they're in a 360 office rather than why? Tons of market tours. We would have, when we open, one example.
Oh, market tours. I thought market tours was one word.
Clients in, they want to see this. When we opened our LA North office in Glendale, it's in a former Masonic temple that was vacant for years and years, and it's across from Caruso development. Beautiful product. These pitch ceilings, it's really awesome. And just the amount of it was a wow space that drew not just our employees there to say, that's where I want to get some work done, but it also brought our clients there. And to your point, this is the trend. This is where the industry was going. And at least now they're like, all right, I want to work with you guys because you're walking the walk and you're eating the dog food.
Yeah. So, God, there's some really good questions. And I have my own. So I'm like, competing with myself here.
It's their question. I don't trust yours.
Yeah, you shouldn't. So one question sort of quickly about safety, and then we'll move into some. Actually, is CBRE spending dollars on physical changes? And or redesigning their current offices? For post-pandemic use?
We've made the decision not to. We don't feel like we need to retrofit our existing offices. However, we believe, and the data from certain technology will tell us this, but we believe people will be coming to work for the collaborative or we spaces more than they will come to work for the individual heads down work from home. So that being said, we've got pools of workstations and offices all over our portfolio unassigned. So we think that there's an opportunity where we could repurpose some of those neighborhoods or pockets into a different use. So one example is I'm really passionate around designing for neurodiversity. And we're trying to really do our part to make the industry and our company a lot more diverse and more inclusive. And we don't just mean racial diversity. We're talking different way people think and learn, and they work better if they're, not facing more distractions, et cetera. So we're talking about maybe repurposing some of these pods of workstations into it is the Amtrak quiet car or a haven, and you could reserve there, but there is no talking. It is just purely quiet zone. Now, is that a huge capital investment? No. but we're just kind of repurposing and adjusting on the fly based on where we see the different demand cases for our employees may be. Neurodiversity, I think, is a big bet. So that's just one example of where we can do some reconfiguration without spending a whole lot of money.
Do you use software? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
And moving forward, I don't think it'll be anything monumental change, but we are having lots and lots of meetings about, look, we can get rid of that type of space. We can shrink this or give more space between people, so less dense. So we don't foresee us taking huge drastic drop in our portfolio from a size perspective. We're going to give our people a little bit more room within the four walls, more choice. And again, I think we're just going to be doubling down on just healthy building, outdoor spaces, technology, once again, just overall experience. Like, people remember that experience of walking into a workplace, and that is just something we're heavily focused on, that hospitality, that white glove treatment. I can give you an example of what I mean by that, but I know you had a question.
No, give me the example and then I'll ask a question.
So here's one example. So in Atlanta, we did a new Workplace 360 office, and we piloted this program called Host. So we have the technology, the mobile app, but there's also the people side, Concierge. And people are like, well, we already have receptionists. What's the difference with the Host? The difference is, when I was getting ready to go to check out this brand new office that, my team helped manage and build with a lot of our internal partners, Janice, my admin, called me in a panic, and she's like, Peter, I'm so sorry. I don't know how you like your coffee. And I'm like, Janice, what are you calling me about? Like, you're in Dallas, I'm in DC. Why do you need to know how I like my coffee? And she's like, well, the host in Atlanta wants to have your drink ready for you when you walk in the door, and they wanted to know how you like your coffee. I was like, that is like, if I were to walk into a space and the person's like, I know you like your coffee black and bold and dark, here you go. Like, wow, that's pretty awesome. And that's just one small example, but we're really going through this whole journey mapping experience right now of what is the point of arrival to our workplaces and the point of exit, and how do you create that wow moment that's not just design or the prettiness or the aesthetic of the space, but how it makes you feel.
I mean, this is a very progressive way of looking at office space. I mean, I think I've asked you a series of questions to which you've essentially replied, I'm not really sure. We'll see.
We'll see.
And I have to say, like, as someone who sort of collaborates with and has colleagues in sort of this industry, I think there are a lot of folks that feel like pre-pandemic, I got a lot more certainty around what was going to happen in the future. Post-pandemic, I get a lot more answers like that, which is like, look, I don't know, but our job is essentially to be flexible. And in order to be flexible, and this is more, I think, a bias of my own, but like, we ought to measure the space that we have so that we can figure out how to design better space in the future. It sounds like it's not just practical policies or designs or sort of like a real estate spend. It sounds like it's maybe a cultural thing, which is like, our job is to figure out how to serve our customers, who are these teams, and to do so, we are trying to be as flexible as possible. Is that a fair assessment?
I think you're absolutely right. And we recognize that our workplace is an amplifier of our culture and our brand. It's a brand statement, and it needs to really build upon and foster that sense of collaboration and community. Otherwise, culture just eats strategy for breakfast. And so no matter what direction you're going, if you're not nailing the culture piece and you're not aligned with how the sense of office really mirrors and aligned to what the culture is, it's not going to work.
Yeah. There was a good question about, I think, associated with this kind of flexibility. And I realize that the short answer is probably, I'm not sure, because you've already answered it this way. But I'd still love for you to prognosticate a little bit, which is, a decade or two ago, the movement of open plan office design was like the future. And it got implemented much like the Action Office of Herman Miller's Action Office, where it became the cubicle farms of the future. it was never intended to become a cubicle farm. But that was sort of its origin. And the open office got bastardized as well. It sort of resulted in sort of like everything's open, and lots of noise. And then we have Bluetooth noise canceling headphones as a way to create quiet space. The question is a good one, which is, do you think that the unassigned sort of seating in spaces is essentially the open plan design of the modern day, that it will eventually sort of come home to roost in an unfortunate outcome?
That's a great question. I don't know, but
I don't know.
But I think I'm confident in that our workplace 360 program was never that cubicle farm of open plan. I've seen some open plan where instead of it just being a cubicle farm, it's just like a series of workstations, sit-stand workstation with no dividers, no variety, and it is just hot desking for miles.
That's more what I meant. I was speaking to the cubicles just as a historical point. But yeah, the open plan of workstations. Yeah.
But ours has never felt like that, and in fact, we're only introducing more variety. So we subscribe to, of course, activity-based working, and again, it's just about variety and spaces, and visually, we like to break it up. So one aspect that we do a lot of it of is like just informal collaboration spaces that are completely not even enclosed. It's like a gazebo sitting in your workplace, and it's got like some slats and maybe a monitor, maybe some whiteboard. It seems like it's really open, and it could be really distracting if you were sitting near it and people were meeting there. But because of the right acoustics and the right design of the place, you can't even hear what 2 feet away. It's pretty remarkable. But again, it's creating just so many spaces of gathering, so many places of collaboration. Where we are right now, I don't see people saying, I don't want to come to the office to collaborate.
I want my desk now. You're saying that you don't know that you see that sort of.
And people will come to the office to get heads down work done still. But I mean, even as an example, when we first did the Workplace 360 program, the unassigned workstations were intended to be heads down individual work. What ended up happening was that's where teams would gather, and you would have a 6-pack of workstations and a team of 6 people. And it was just like, hey, Andrew, hey, hey, what's up? And they were just like kind of talking over the ledge, and you were doing heads down work, but you're able to ask questions. And it just kind of became a little team pod. And if you needed distraction free, like you'd be like, I'm putting in headphones, stop talking to me. And that's just an unintended consequence of it wasn't what we initially designed for, but it was a nice byproduct, to be honest.
Sure.
And if people really needed heads down focus work, they would maybe go duck into an office or a closed focus room and just go hang out there.
So we have a lot of different folks on the call today from a lot of different companies and spaces. How much can you kind of situate we've sort of seen kind of like a distinction between user types, which are like the admins of an office that are managing the portfolio. That would be Peter Van Emburgh. Then there's sort of like the admins of an office that are managing the workplace's design, where it's like layout, furniture, specific floor plate, how we're thinking about this particular building, how that building is doing. How much of that are you doing both of? And where do you fall? Do you think that distinction is accurate? And if not, what is the right way to think about who owns the decisions of what furniture goes into a certain space? Because you're talking about slats on a divider, while at the same time talking about $100 million spend on, portfolio. So can you kind of situate me a bit?
So, I mean, as a corporate real estate user, I mean, you're really you're wearing all those hats as a function, but you're only as successful as the people you serve. So I have to work with the business. I have to work with the local market leaders, with the people who are going to occupy the office. And so we have a very prescribed way of 12 months, 18 months, 24 months out ahead of a lease expiration. We have a whole change management process and a program by which we engage the local office or the local occupants of that space or business unit and, create employee engagement committees. The leadership committee will break them down into like, have some volunteers help pick out furniture, have some volunteers serve on the art committee, et cetera. So I hold the contracts with, our furniture provider, Herman Miller in this case, or we've got some art vendors and stuff. So it's like when I present my kids with a choice for ice cream or just dessert, right? I'm like, okay, it's going to be either, do you want vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? I only have one type of ice cream, one type of dessert to provide them. And I'm giving them guardrails, but still giving them limited choice. So they feel like they're bought in, they are engaged, but it's within the two choices I've already narrowed down into. And that's how we do, say, desk chairs. So I've got like 3 desk chairs. I don't care which the 3 they want to pick because I'm happy with all 3 of them. So that's my job as corporate real estate executive, hold the contracts, drive some consistency so that there's a global brand behind all of our offices. However, my favorite part about this role is that none of our offices look the same. So it's a global brand reflecting a local character.
How do you achieve that?
We achieve that, again, we want to really reflect the local architecture, the local culture and feel into the office. So Atlanta, big 100,000 square foot office we have in Atlanta, and we had this muralist, street art muralist come, and he did a huge mural of a flying Georgia peach or a big MARTA bus. And again, it was like, here's your art budget, go engage someone locally. The employee committee gets engaged and they really buy into how do we reflect the local character of Atlanta and what makes Atlanta
Sure.
through in our CB office.
Your customers are probably local too. I mean, your customers are coming in, they're from that locale. So it makes a lot of sense to invest in that.
Yeah.
I want to do some rapid fire questions because there's a handful of ones that I want to make sure we touch base on. One quick thing on the safety stuff. How are you, there's like the perception of safety and then there's the actual safety policies. So, the perception is sort of like the communication and, how you do a signage. So, are people aware that you are managing the capacity to keep everybody safe? And if so, how are you communicating that?
Yeah, I mean, we work with all those local offices on the reopening of our offices and the operations teams who are frontline. I mean, and our corporate communications team and legal and everybody. I mean, there is tons of communications that here's what to expect. Here's how you reserve, download the app, set a reservation. And we talk through the different safety protocols. But what's interesting about this is office cleaning, for example, it used to take place after hours. People didn't really know. I think they assumed their offices were being cleaned, but they didn't know or ever see it because it was the guy with like the jetpack, cleaning after hours. Well, now we do it throughout the day a little bit more and do some enhanced cleaning because it's really important for us to, again, they need to see the cleanings happening, probably hear the vacuuming going on somewhere, but you also you smell it too. Like, oh, it's been sanitized.
That's interesting. So like you get the feeling of safety. You get the feeling of cleanliness.
That's delivery. Yeah. And we'll do signage.
I mean, you're also cleaning, but it plays a dual role.
And a lot of signage like this space is safe or not safe and don't sit here and you can stand here, door decals, wall decals, like a lot of signage.
And how do you communicate if a space has gone above the maximum capacity?
Well, we control it with the reservations. So, for example, let's see they hit 40 reservations on a day, then we come up with a waiting list. Someone walks out and we'll tell them, we're like, hey, sorry, you're on a waiting list. We'll email you as soon as
there's space
has come down, and then you can come back. You can come in if you want. Some people will. Some people will be like, oh, forget it, I'll just stay at home.
Sure. Gotcha. Speaking of reservations, what technology do you use? What's popular? These are going to be rapid fire. I'm going to roll through these pretty quickly.
What technology are we using for what?
For reservations. Do you use
our Cbre host app?
Gotcha. So that's a branded, that's like a CBRE owned property.
We do sell it.
Okay, cool.
$9.99. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. For the low price of $10.99 per month.
3 easy installments.
That's right. All right. Is your occupancy data anonymous?
Yes.
Or are you able to dig into, did you say yes?
We do occupancy tracking anonymously. frankly, from my standpoint as a head of corporate real estate, I really don't care who's coming in. I know how many seats I have, and I want to know how many people are coming in against that seat capacity.
Is there a health screener? Do you have somebody who's like an employee that is
So we do self-screening on the same app. So
inside host?
reserve tomorrow to go to the DC office. I reserve it, sign up for a space in the DC office, and then tomorrow morning before I go in the office, I have to do this employee self-screening through the app. When I walk in, I show them that I've been cleared to come to the office. And they
Gotcha.
also sort of contact tracing. Should something ever happen where there is an incident in our office, we know who's come through, but haven't needed to do that.
Gotcha. Smart buildings. It seems, I mean, smart buildings was a big topic of conversation 5-10 years ago, kind of puttered out a little bit, I think, in the marketing, but has become more substantive in its like actual substance. So what's do you see the adoption of technology sort of being layered into buildings become an increasing trend in the future?
100%. And for me, my interest in it is coming from a biased view. I'm interested in the smart building application as it impacts user experience. So again, when I went back to like the point of arrival to point of departure, smart building, I wanted to show me how many parking spaces are available in the garage and like the indicators. I wanted to, I can order coffee on the app or reserve a office or, all of those sort of things. I just think that's going to continue to be a huge, huge trend. There's just so many applications of smart building technology. I mean, I have a spreadsheet from my advisors within Cbre that specialize in this, and there's like 250 applications of what you could do that are smart building. But I think we're going to continue to see that take off.
Yeah. There's a program. Are you familiar with a program called WELL, capital W, capital E, capital L, capital L, Health Safety Rating by IWBI? Are you familiar with that?
So we actually, the WELL standard from the WELL Building Institute, our downtown LA office, the first headquarters, was the first commercial WELL certified office space in the world. So we're familiar with it. We've got a couple WELL certified offices in Canada and Europe, as well as the US. We also are playing around with Fitwell, which is very similar to WELL, and they're focused on the user experience and the well-being of inside the office. We've explored it and looked at it from the cleanliness and the health certification that's come out through the pandemic, where they will do a WELL, like good housekeeping seal of approval that this is, safe air and all of that. But at this time, we're not using that, but we could. So we look at, when I do my spaces, I look at the building certification, like LEED, as well as either WELL or Fitwell that focuses on employee well-being. Gotcha.
Cool. So we have nearly every attendee who joined is still here an hour later. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. I would love to maybe close with, we'll close before the top of the hour, but I'd love to close with, we've talked, I think, in bits and pieces about the future of offices. Certainly like in more practical ways, like what are the technologies that we're using today. But I guess I would love to hear you snap your fingers, you fast forward a certain number of years, and you've been able to achieve everything you've ever wanted for buildings. What does it look like? What do you imagine? And I realize that like being flexible and saying I don't really know is a perfectly valid way of looking at that. And very Peter, and I love it. But you have a unique perspective. You have a unique perspective on the market, and I think we'd all sort of love to hear just like you've got a magic wand. Like, what does it look like?
Well, keep in mind the future of office, and I'm not trying to, give a non-answer here, but the future of office depends on what the use is. An office in a healthcare looks different from an office for a data center. So when I'm thinking office, I'm thinking commercial use, but I think more than ever, the office will be seen as a driver of business performance. more so than it really ever has. It's typically a function of activity, or historically, like this is where work gets done. I envision where the actual workplace, the driver of business performance, it's a driver of inclusiveness and achieving your diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, because you're fostering employee attraction and retention and professional development. It is driving business revenue like it has for us, where you're walking the walk. I think it's driving culture and innovation and strategy that is just so hard to be innovative and strategic when the workforce is remote. And we believe that very strongly. So I think it will be like a beehive and a buzz of activity around a sense of coming together, collaborating to drive business performance. That's my answer.
I mean, it sounds like, if I'm what I'm hearing is that like the office is essentially something where you can draw much clearer, direct lines to outcomes, as opposed to soft, generalized sort of brush strokes to outcomes. And that a lot of that has to do with the decisions that you make to help retain your employees and engage them with their teams, and then ultimately measure the performance of the building itself. Is this thing working? And if it's not, how do we either modify it, or how do we avoid a lease that we don't need, or how do we redesign it, or how do we implement, introduce a new concept or team? Again, I'm coming from a biased perspective, but it sounds like measurement is an important part of.
Measurement is so important to how we spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to build these beautiful spaces to house our people, but how are we measuring the outcome of that? So tying it to employee engagement scores. Mm-hmm. Like I am right now tying another initiative, I'm tying every dollar of capital investment to the correlation in Cbre employee engagement scores, as an example. So again, these are very business outcome metrics that I'm tying the actual workplace environment to business objectives, revenue growth, serving our employees, serving our clients. I feel like there will be a much more hard line and driver and almost an accelerator of that.
Yeah. One last super practical question. Are you planning on mandating vaccinations, or will it be, how are you going to deal with that policy?
We have made that decision. We're not mandating that, no.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay. To everyone who stuck around for a full hour, thank you so much for your time. Peter, you're awesome. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah. I mean, we'll do this as often as possible. And to the folks who are still here on March 2nd, Tuesday, March 2nd. So I believe that's next week. We're speaking to the Senior Manager of Global Workplace Operations at Twilio. She is spectacular from everything I've heard. We'd love to have you join. You can learn more by going to density.io and looking for webinars. But hope to have you back again soon, Peter, if you don't mind.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. See you, folks.